Welcome back to The Explainer. Okay, let's jump right in, because today we are heading straight into what a lot of people consider the absolute most uncomfortable territory in Robert Greene's historical analysis. We are decoding laws 13 through 18. Now, if you're already familiar with the earlier laws, you know they really set up the baseline, things like controlling narratives and conserving your energy. But this next batch, well, these are the laws that clash directly with pretty much everything we've ever been taught about mercy, loyalty, and, just how we're supposed to treat people. They definitely feel a bit controversial, but as we're going to see, the historical patterns they expose are entirely undeniable, whether we happen to like them or not. We're going to completely unpack the core logic behind power. So think about this for a second. What actually separates the powerful from the vulnerable? It's a massive question, isn't it? Green's deep dive into centuries of human behavior shows us that the dividing line isn't about who happens to be the cruelest or even who's the loudest in the room. It's really about who understands the underlying mechanics of human nature. These patterns, they show up everywhere, in every royal court, every modern boardroom, and yes, even in your own social circles. To truly grasp the core logic behind power, we have to look objectively at how people actually operate in the real world, rather than how we maybe wish they did. All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, Acquiring the Ultimate Currency. Now, you might assume the ultimate currency of power is money, right? Or status, or raw authority. But true power actually begins with something much more fundamental. This really perfectly illustrates the bedrock of Law 13. Basically, when you need help, begging for mercy or hoping for gratitude is just a losing strategy. The source material highlights this great historical example of a drowning man desperately begging bystanders, just screaming, "Save me," and he was largely ignored. Why? Well, because appeals like, "I need this favor," or "I'm in a tight spot," activate mercy. And mercy is a real emotion, sure, but it is a terribly weak motivator. People only act on it when they just happen to be in a generous mood. But contrast that with a second drowning man who took a totally different approach. He yelled out, "Save me, and I'll teach you everything I know about navigating these treacherous waters." Boom, suddenly help arrived. He activated their self-interest. So, the absolute crucial takeaway here is that true power comes from alignment, not manipulation. It's about finding that sweet spot where two people are moving in the exact same direction because it benefits them both. And that naturally brings us to Law 14, Pose as a friend, work as a spy. Look, I know this sounds incredibly deceptive, maybe a bit like a movie villain, but what's truly fascinating is the practical, everyday reality behind it. Information, that is the ultimate currency of power. History's absolute most effective courtiers didn't interrogate people with a spotlight. No, they simply gathered crucial intelligence by appearing genuinely interested during casual social situations. They just listened. They absorbed people's fears, their ambitions, their secret weaknesses, their big plans. The person in the room who seems the most relaxed, the most warmly social, yeah, they are often the one strategically mapping the entire dynamic. And this naturally flips into your own personal defense strategy. If other people are out there posing as friends to gather intel, you have to realize that literally every interaction is an information exchange. It's not about being paranoid, it's just about having situational awareness. Whatever you willingly reveal, that's what others now log as fact. What you constantly ask about, well, that reveals your blind spots and exactly what you don't know. And perhaps the biggest one, what you visibly react to emotionally, that broadcasts exactly what matters to you. If you can't regulate those emotions and measure your words, you are basically freely handing over the currency of power to everyone around you. Moving right along to Section 2, Controlling Your Visibility. Okay, so we've talked about what you say, but how you manage your actual physical presence and your behavioral patterns, that directly dictates the leverage you hold. This perfectly captures Law 16. Think about the overexposed courtier. You know the type. This is the person who is always around, instantly responds to every single message, hyper-visible at all times. And what happens? They become part of the furniture, taken entirely for granted. They essentially become invisible precisely because of their own overexposure. Now compare that to the absent courtier. This is someone who deliberately applies scarcity. They are selectively unavailable, and by stepping away, their eventual presence becomes an actual event. People talk about them when they aren't there. As the source material points out, tapping into the psychology of scarcity, a scarce resource is always valued way higher than an abundant one. Use absence to increase your respect. Now let's turn the dial up on this visibility concept with Law 17, Cultivate Unpredictability. The source shares this incredibly fascinating anecdote about the chess genius Bobby Fischer. Fisher didn't just play the board, right? He played the opponent. He would show up late, make these completely outrageous demands, and just behave in ways nobody in that stiff, highly professional chess world ever expected. Before a single pawn was even moved, his opponents were already destabilized. Their expectations were completely shattered. Fisher used unpredictability itself as a psychological weapon. And the reason Fisher's wild tactics work so well is pretty simple. Humans are, at our very core, pattern recognition machines. If you are entirely 100% consistent, you become what's known as a mapped person. You become predictable, anticipated, neutralized, and ultimately controlled. Because once someone identifies your pattern, they know exactly what you're going to do next, and people who can predict you can control you. To maintain that core logic of power, you absolutely have to break your own patterns deliberately. You want to be consistent enough to be trusted for sure, but unpredictable enough that you can never be fully mapped. Okay, let's dive into Section 3, neutralizing threats and blind spots. This next one is, without a doubt, the most brutal yet coldly analytical application of power. Law 15, crush your enemy totally. This is the law most people genuinely want to skip right over because it sounds so incredibly harsh, but Green means it with absolute precision. We are simply laying out the historical reality here. If you defeat an opponent, but you leave them wounded, resentful, and capable of eventually recovering, you haven't actually won anything. You've really just delayed the fight, and you've guaranteed that next time around, it will be driven by a deeply personal grudge. And to see exactly why, just look at the catastrophic mistake made by the Chinese general Xiang Yu. In year 1, he had his bitter rival, Liu Bang, completely at his mercy. Xiang Yu's advisors literally begged him to finish it, but he thought it was unnecessary. He thought it was unkind. He chose mercy. And what happened? Look at years 2 through 4, unseen recovery. Liu Bang quietly rebuilt his strength in the shadows. And then in year 5, at a moment of maximum vulnerability, he struck. Xiang Yu was eventually completely destroyed by the very man he had spared. The lesson here isn't that you should be gratuitously cruel. It's that partial victories are just delayed defeats. If a conflict is completely unavoidable, the resolution has to be total. You leave zero capacity for retaliation. Now, obviously, when we're facing threats, our first, deepest instinct is to protect ourselves. Which brings us to Law 18. Do not build fortresses. Isolation is dangerous. When threatened, human instinct screams at us to withdraw, to build huge walls and limit who has access to us. But in the architecture of power, that is almost always the fatal move. Picture the isolated ruler. They retreat behind their heavy, thick fortress walls, totally insulated from reality, surrounded by nothing but nodding advisors who only tell them what they want to hear. The crazy thing is, the very fortress that supposedly protects them from their enemies simultaneously blinds them to what those enemies are actually doing. They end up completely unprepared for the real challenge. On the flip side, consider the connected strategist. They circulate. They actively embrace the discomfort of open engagement, because the core logic tells us that the discomfort of staying connected is incredibly small compared to the massive existential danger of not knowing what is shifting right outside your walls. Information dies in isolation. Which brings us to Section 4, the core logic. So we've just blitzed through laws 13 through 18, and at first glance, yeah, they might seem like 6 random, kind of ruthless tactics. But when you take a step back, these laws actually form a highly cohesive system, and it can all be summarized by one profound thesis. Power flows toward whoever has the most accurate model of reality. Really think about that. Appealing to self-interest, that requires knowing what others actually want in reality. Posing as a friend to spy, that's about gathering reality. Crushing an enemy totally, acknowledging the reality of a lingering threat. Using absence and unpredictability, manipulating how others perceive reality. The ultimate victor in history is rarely the loudest person in the room. They are rarely the most aggressive. No, they are always the most deeply informed. Finally, let's hit Section 5, your next power move. So how do we actually take this grand historical strategy and bring it into your normal daily life? We're going to apply a highly actionable reframe of Law 13 right now. Step 1, identify a request you need to make. Maybe it's asking for a favor, a specific resource, or a new opportunity. Step 2, immediately stop thinking about what you need and ask yourself what they need. And step 3, rewrite your entire request to lead completely with their interest, not yours. Show them exactly how fulfilling your request actually moves them closer to the thing they want. If you can consistently apply this single reframe, I promise you, it will fundamentally change how people respond to you in absolutely any professional context. I want to leave you with a provocative question to chew on. What will your next request reveal about your understanding of power? Every single time you interact, you are either operating with the most accurate model of reality or you are just appealing to the weak currents of mercy. Actively apply this core logic starting today. Start mapping the room, align self-interests, and brace yourself. Because next time, we're going to be diving deep into the dynamics of knowing exactly who you are dealing with. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. See you in the next one.